So in this little clip, I'm going to demonstrate how I made these blocks that I'm calling my Shibori blocks. The only reason to call them Shibori blocks is because they originally started with a layer cake of these fabrics done by Debbie Matty, and that was the name of her fabric line. So I had a couple of these left over from the quilt that I showed you the other day, and you can see that a lot of them are not a Shibori fabric. This one is, but the rest of them are not. Each block is made up of 3 fabrics. You have the center and you have the 4 corners, and then the 3rd fabric that makes up the vase and the cross piece. So it is 9 pieces, like a 9 patch, but because you're cutting curved lines and I cut them freehand, there are a couple of little complications. Because there's no seam allowance included when I cut it this way, these points are not going to match up very well. But I did try to make them match as best as I could, and so that's part of what I'm going to be trying to show you today. But first, I am going to show you how I selected the fabrics and cut the fabrics. For today, I am using this group of fabrics that are batiks, and it's a line called Here There. I have a lot of it, and I thought it would translate pretty well to sort of the modern aesthetic of these Shibori blocks. So I'm going to pick out from these a set of 3 or 4 or 5 fabrics. I don't generally stack more than about 5 fabrics at a time for this, primarily because I want the variety in the shapes that I'm getting from the width of these stripes. So if you want a lot of variety in these, you wouldn't want to cut any more than 3 blocks or 3 fabrics at a time. If you wanted them to be all the same, then you would be better off trying to cut as many as possible at a time, so that all of these shapes end up being the same throughout. So let me pick a couple of fabrics, and then from those fabrics we need to cut 10-inch squares. So let's see what we can find for a batch of 3 or 4 fabrics to work together nicely for this. Let's see what will grab my attention. So I'm kind of liking this look of using some of this mustardy gold and pulling out some of the gold in these. And so I kind of like these together. I could pop in a blue with that, and I could also pop in a gray if I wanted to. Let's see, is there anything else? You could do a pink instead of the gray, or instead of the blue. What does that do for it? And since I don't want more than 5, well, maybe those will be my 5 that I use. Also have this one. And I think if I have these 2 yellows, I think that's enough yellow, so I don't know that I need to add any more of those. But you could do if you were so inclined. I could also try, I suppose, something a bit darker, because you do want to have some contrast, but I think that that's enough contrast between those 2, and I think these 2 have enough contrast, as well as these and these. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut my 10-inch squares, as I said before, and then I want to arrange them so that I like the contrast between each fabric, and so I want to maybe play around with that a little bit. Do I want these 2 next to each other, Or do I want to have those two next to each other? Or, you know, which order do I want them in? Because when I cut them and swap them around, you'll still have a chance to make another change, but I think I could go with that. I think I like that. And so let me go cut these 10-inch squares and show you what we're going to do after that. So if I wanted to work with the reds, I could start perhaps with this lighter one and then see if these will play nicely together. Maybe those. There's just not a lot of contrast between these two, so might need to move that over to another spot. I don't really like how these are going to bleed together, so I don't like that position for those. Let's see, could we throw in something else here? What do we like with the red? I know that's not red, but that might still let the reds work together. Or maybe the yellow. What do you think of that? I don't know that I want to use the same pattern again, so that's why I'm not pulling those. I'm just looking for a different color. And even if it's 4 instead of 5, I think that would be fine as well. Maybe with the yellow I could throw this one back in. It's not reading very red, is it? So maybe we'll try this grouping as well. I'm just going to keep playing with some different groupings here. So this is the one that I tried, and here's another one. And let's see if I can add a couple more to these. Now I might be able to use one of these cool patterns. Like that. And what else could I throw in? Could maybe do one like that. Do we like this one better? Kind of blue and red. So there we have some. I am going to surprise you, and I will come back with some 10-inch squares cut. And you'll have to try to guess which one I'm going to do. So I've pressed these fabrics and layered them. There's 5 fabrics here. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I've put my smallest piece on the top to make sure that I had enough room and that I didn't miscut and not get a full 10-inch square out of the smallest piece. You can see there's really plenty of room. I have almost 1/3 of a yard here. And I also thought I'd show you how I go about cutting my squares as well. For right now, you can disregard these 2 taped lines. That will be the size that we trim the blocks to once they're cut and sewn. These 10-inch squares, when the block is done, will be trimmed to 8.5 and will finish at 8 inches in the quilt. So I will line up my corner here, and I'm going to trim 2 sides at a time. I am not using the markings on the mat. I never do. It allows me to move my fabric around much more easily, and I don't believe the lines on these mats to be at all accurate. So since I am right-handed and I can't quite get to that other side, I am going to use this second ruler, and I do that a lot, and I'm going to butt that one up so that I can now trim this side. And I peek and I make sure that I have indeed cut through all of them, just in case something wasn't aligned properly. And I will turn my ruler around, and I will line the 10-inch line on the 2 edges that I just cut. And I'll make sure that I got it all before I move my ruler out of the way. And now we have our 10-inch squares to work with. So I can remove that. So I kind of played a little switcheroo on you, and I changed the fabrics that I wanted to use. I didn't use any of the groupings that I just showed you previously. What do you think about that? So now I want to double check and see if this is actually the order that I want my squares to be in. I kind of moved them around a little bit so that ideally you won't have to move them around, because after they're nicely cut and all in one place, it's better if you don't have to shift them around again. But I will, because I think I like it like this better. So I will stack these up as neatly as I can, and it's really not too big a deal, because since this is all being cut freehand and trimmed later, as long as you have them pretty close to on top of each other, it'll be fine. So the first cut that I make, and I'm only using a rotary cutter, and I could use my bigger one if I wanted to. That would be fine as well. So I'll try the bigger one. It makes going through the 5 layers a little bit easier. So I'm first going to cut my vase shape out from this. And I'm looking, I want it to be about this big in the middle. I don't want it to be too tiny at either end, although it doesn't matter a whole lot. And I'm going to try to center it so I'm not too close to one side or the other. So let's just try to cut a nice curve. And just go for it. Okay? And that's what I have. And it's all right if it's not perfect, but I think that's a pretty nice shape. So then I'm going to cut my opposite direction, and so for that, since I'm going to do a somewhat narrow one, again I'm going to try to center it more or less, and again I'm just going to cut a couple of nice arcs in here. And those are our pieces. And since I used 5 fabrics, this will give me 5 blocks. So however many squares you stack up, that's how many blocks you will get at the end. And what I'm thinking I'm going to do with this, and one reason why I changed the colors, is that I think I'll make a table runner for this that'll kind of be late summer-ish with kind of these, I think these colors will work well for this time of year here in the US where it's hot. So I suppose it could be good for many seasons of the year. But anyway, that was my thought when I went with these colors. So now we're going to swap these blocks around, or swap the fabrics around. And I'm going to move this one down to the bottom and move this one down to the bottom and this one down. And then I want to take 2 out of here and put 2 to the bottom. And that gives us one of our sets. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, and I don't think there's going to be room to show all of these, is that what I actually like to do is I like to lay out all 5 blocks to make sure that the combinations are what I wanted to do. So that I want to make sure that my layout that I thought I liked at the beginning is actually going to work. So give me just a minute and I'm going to try to lay out all of these 5 blocks for you to see. Okay, so now I've got my blocks sorted, and let's see if I can move this around a little so you can see. My mat's not quite big enough, my camera angle isn't quite big enough. So now that I know that I have these the way I want them, I'm going to start to sew. So I will bring these blocks over to my sewing machine and let's see what I can show you there as to how I put those together. Okay, let's give this a try. I am going to sew this curve. It's a very gentle curve. And when I start, I am going to be very, very slightly offsetting these ends so that there's no more than 1/4 of an inch right at the very tip like that. And I have my needle down already, and I like to do that because that way I know that it's going to go right into that curve or right into that notch that I've created. And when you sew a curve like this, all you're going to do is you're going to match up the edges. I will just very slowly bring one edge to meet the other, and I also have this little tiny bit of a notch at the very end right here. And since this is kind of freeform piecing, it doesn't need to be perfect. Here's the next one, and they are, again, I am offsetting these. I'm just having a tiny bit of a piece tucked out there, and push that one fabric to meet the other. I think you could either have it match up on the top or the bottom layer, either one. So this one seems like it's going to be very wonky, but it's really not, because when you start sewing that curve, they all end up matching up pretty nicely. So I'll take a couple of stitches and I'm aligning those 2 edges. I keep my machine going most of the time. I don't need to stop and start or readjust. If I'm kind of going slowly enough, I can adjust as the machine is going. So those are the first 3 pieces, and now I can add the next one on. I'll give you a little preview of that. That looks pretty good. It matches up fairly well, and I'm not too worried about that one. Those are all looking pretty good. Like, I'm not going to have to trim off an awful lot. There isn't a lot of excess in order to trim them to 8.5 inches. if you are having a little difficulty with this, then it's okay to trim them down farther to 8¼ or 8 inches, as long as you continue to use a consistent size for your trimming up. But I found that I was able to get an 8½ inch cut block out of these. So just keep bringing it over. Let's see, I can lift up my presser foot sometimes just to help with that a little bit if it's not cooperating. Always take a couple of stitches and let that needle help me. If you have something with a needle down position, that's a really, really helpful feature to have on your sewing machine. If you don't have it, then you can either turn your hand wheel or to manually lower it. Good, I've got that nice little tip there at the end. That's what I want. These are fairly gentle curves, so they're really not too hard to work with. So that's my block for right now. I'm going to press it, and then I will come back and sew these 2 horizontal seams. The pressing is going to kind of choose itself, like if it wants to go out. This one seems to want to go out, and that's fine. That means that I will press these 2 in, and I will press these 2 seams out. And I can kind of give it a finger press, and before I take it over to the iron. I could probably even just sew it just like this. So this one is actually lining up quite well. And in some of my earlier blocks, they did not want to line up at all. And I did use a pin because I did want to try to make that work. So I straightened that part out right there. And those are the only pins that I used when I was sewing these horizontal seams. The pin doesn't want to go. Okay, now let's sew the next seam. Again, I'm going to be looking for this little tiny bit of a overlap right there. Tiny, tiny. I am using a 1/4 inch seam. Now this doesn't look like it will match up, but it will. It actually will match up pretty nicely. So again, I'm going to encourage that top layer to meet up with the bottom layer. And that came out pretty well. I probably could have even done a little better on this one. I'm not sure why that didn't quite stay where I pinned it. Maybe I will fix it later, maybe I won't. If it bothers you, fix it. If it doesn't bother you, keep going. So I'm going to just put a couple of pins in on this next one. And let's sew this last seam. Don't worry about the rest of the curve until you get there. So I'm really only looking at the area that's about a half an inch or so to an inch in front of my needle. I'm not worried about the latter part. And if I don't like where that matches up, I'm going to just take that pin out and I'm going to just scoot that a little bit because I like this better. So I have one hand kind of underneath and then the other hand on top, one working with each of the layers. Okay, so let me give this a little press and we will see how it looks when it's all pressed. So here is our finished block, pressed and ready for trimming. And now I can use my ruler with my 8.5 inch lines marked on it. And you can see that I have plenty of room all the way around. And so I'm looking at all the edges to see that I have a little bit of leeway each way. And I do. So I'm happy with this placement. And I am just going to awkwardly trim, trying to reach around my camera here. Probably not going to be the best job here. And let's do the other two sides. And there you have it. So I hope that you found that this was helpful for you. I hope that maybe just by being able to watch me sew it, cut, sew, and do the whole process, that you'll be wanting to try one of these blocks. And if you're a little tentative, then maybe you have some older fabrics that you don't mind if they don't turn out the way you want, something that you can experiment with before you cut into something that's a little bit more precious. And I hope that you'll find it fun, and thanks for watching this demo from the Everyday Sewist. Have a great day.